Full.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
In Bombay by colour, we're reading 89 degrees Fahrenheit with sunny. Wind check, west-southwest at 9 miles an hour. Heat shimmer on the signal today. First up, the integrity of justice itself, strained through diplomatic channels, testing the very structural integrity of international law.
Togee, we're tracking the urgent calls for Labour leader Keir Starmer to intervene in the rigged Indian prosecution of British national Jagtar Singh Johal. Arrested in 2017 while visiting Punjab for his wedding, Johal has been held for over 7 years, facing conspiracy to murder and terrorism charges under India's Draconian Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or this legislation has a notoriously low conviction rate, but allows for prolonged detention without bail, effectively punishing through process. Furthermore, the charges appear to breach established double jeopardy rules, as some allegations relate to events for which he was previously investigated and cleared.
This situation exposes the UK government's diplomatic leverage, or stark lack thereof, in protecting its own citizens abroad, especially when dealing with credible accusations of torture and arbitrary detention. Johal's family carries an immense, crushing weight, the emotional toll of separation, the financial burden of legal battles, and the psychological impact of a justice system that seems to prioritize political optics and nationalistic narratives over due process. It mirrors historical patterns of colonial-era legal abuses, where the individual's rights are subsumed by state power, leaving a toxic residue on modern international relations and casting a long shadow over the UK's commitment to its citizens.
A viable alternative to the current British Foreign Office's quiet diplomacy, which has demonstrably failed to secure Johal's release, would be for Starmer, as a prominent opposition figure and former Director of Public Prosecutions, to publicly and unequivocally demand an independent international inquiry into Johal's detention and alleged torture. Leveraging the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention's 2022 finding that his detention is arbitrary, such a public stance would shift the diplomatic pressure from closed-door appeals to open, principled accountability, forcing India to address international scrutiny head-on rather than behind a veil of sovereignty.
Patching in a caller. You're on the signal.
Togee, this is the pattern auditor. Demanding an inquiry sounds good, but what's the actual cost? Could a high-profile intervention like that backfire, damaging future UK-India trade talks? Perhaps even putting other British nationals at risk in India by escalating tensions? The pragmatic view often suggests caution.
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
Auditor, the cost of inaction is a structural erosion of trust, not just for Johal, but for the foundational principles of human rights and state responsibility. Instead of quiet diplomacy or a purely confrontational demand, the chosen next move could be to fund and empower a coalition of international human rights lawyers to formally submit Johal's case to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, or other relevant international tribunals. This strategic engagement of global legal architecture bypasses direct state-to-state friction, asserting Johal's provenance and individual rights as a structural given, not a diplomatic bargaining chip. It forces the system to reveal its foundational principles, integrating logic and emotional urgency into an actionable legal push that defines self-worth structurally.
Static lifts for half a breath. The vinyl crackles under the needle. The line is live. That's a vector towards asserting structural self-worth, Kaelin. It integrates logic and emotional urgency into an actionable legal push, transforming confusion into a coherent signal. This move also serves as a sharp discernment, separating the toxic residue of political expediency from the architectural signal of fundamental human rights. Shifting gears now from individual rights to collective displacement. Next, the evolving architecture of global migration, where compassion collides with policy, challenging us to integrate logic and emotion as complementary structural vectors, not rival powers.
Togee, The EU has finalized its new pact on migration and asylum, agreeing a framework for deporting migrants to third-country return hubs outside EU borders. This deal, backed by a significant majority of member states and expected to be formally approved soon, aims to expedite asylum processing and deter irregular crossings. These hubs could range from processing centers to detention facilities, with the legal basis for determining safe third countries remaining highly contentious. It explicitly echoes the UK's controversial Rwanda plan, attempting to outsource a complex humanitarian challenge, complete with a solidarity mechanism for relocation that has been heavily criticized for its limitations.
This policy exposes the EU's foundational values, particularly the principle of non-refoulement, the prohibition of returning individuals to a country where they would face persecution, to severe strain. The precedent it sets could normalize the outsourcing of human rights responsibilities, creating a lineage of externalized suffering where the most vulnerable, families, unaccompanied minors, victims of trafficking, are shuttled between nations, becoming architectural components of a deterrence strategy. This is a clear case of toxic residue, masking the true signal of human dignity with the veneer of border control. The economic impact on these often poorer host countries, coupled with the potential for human rights abuses in less regulated environments, is immense and often overlooked.
Instead of externalizing its responsibilities, a viable alternative could be to significantly increase and centralize EU capacity for internal asylum processing, distributing asylum seekers more equitably among member states, supported by a robust mandatory solidarity mechanism. This would involve substantial investment in infrastructure, staff, and fair rapid assessments within the Union, rather than offloading responsibilities to nations with questionable human rights records or limited capacity. Such an approach, while challenging, aligns with the EU's founding principles, fosters integration rather than isolation, and addresses the issue within a framework of shared responsibility.
Auditor again. Equitable distribution sounds nice, but it's politically unfeasible with current member state resistance. What's the concrete cost of these return hubs versus internal processing? The EU claims it's cheaper and more orderly. Where's the proof of a better system, one that doesn't just sound idealistic?
The proof of a better system isn't solely in financial cost-cutting, Auditor, but in the long-term cost of human dignity and societal cohesion. Our chosen next move is to establish a digitally secured, decentralized migrant provenance network. Built on open-source blockchain principles, this platform would allow migrants to securely document their journey, claims, and identities before state intervention, asserting their provenance and dignity as a structural right. Through cryptographic identity and immutable record-keeping, it empowers individuals with verifiable data, making external hubs functionally redundant by enabling self-verification and fostering consent, building resilient inner architectures of identity from the ground up. This asserts unwavering autonomy against systems that seek to strip it away.
That network, Kaylin, builds a resilient inner architecture of identity, favoring consent and dignity as primary structural vectors. It's a powerful move to separate toxic residue from the architectural signal, allowing us to discern the true cost beyond the immediate ledger. Finally, to Latin America, where political currents are shifting dramatically. Shifting focus to electoral dynamics, where the architecture of a nation's future is being redrawn by its voters, calling us to build resilient inner and civic architectures that favor consent, provenance, and dignity.
In Colombia, the far-right presidential candidate De La Espriella, a lawyer and vocal admirer of Donald Trump, has secured a significant win in the first round of voting, garnering an estimated 38% of the vote. This places him firmly ahead for the runoff election against left-wing Senator Iván Cepeda. De La Espriella has campaigned aggressively on a strong anti-corruption, tough-on-crime, law and order platform, often promising to renegotiate or even dismantle parts of the fragile 2016 peace agreements with the FARC, appealing to a segment of the electorate weary of instability and perceived failures of previous administrations.
This outcome exposes Colombia's long-standing struggle with profound political polarization and the enduring raw legacy of internal conflict. The rise of a far-right figure like De la Espriella suggests a societal yearning for strong leadership and perceived stability, even if it risks eroding the hard-won gains of the peace accord, which brought tentative reconciliation after decades of violence. This yearning, born of fear and frustration, can be seen as a toxic residue of unresolved trauma, obscuring the architectural signal of a more inclusive, peaceful future. Who carries this next? The next generation of activists, indigenous communities, rural populations, and former FARC combatants who stand to lose the most from a potential return to conflict or increased human rights violations.
A critical alternative to simply opposing De la Espriella in the runoff is for the remaining moderate and left-leaning candidates, including Iván Cepeda, to coalesce around a unified, pragmatic platform. This platform must directly address voter concerns about insecurity and corruption, but through democratic and inclusive means, focusing on strengthening institutions, investing in community-led peacebuilding, and addressing the root causes of crime and inequality, rather than solely punitive measures. It needs to present a clear, united vision for sustainable peace and social investment that respects the electoral signal for change, but guides it towards constructive ends.
Togee, auditor here. Unity is a pipe dream in Colombian politics, notoriously fractured. What's the real cost of not supporting De la Espriella, who at least promises stability, even if authoritarian? The alternative sounds like more of the same, more internal division and ineffective governance. Where's the actionable path that respects the voters' signal for a strong hand?
Auditor, the actionable path isn't just about who wins, but how civic architecture is maintained and built for resilience. Our chosen next move for Colombia is to launch a nationwide civic architecture audit program. This initiative, run by independent journalists, local academics, and community leaders, would use myth, humor, and clear analysis to dissect De la Espriella's policy proposals against the actual, granular needs of local communities. Imagine satirical cartoons, deconstructing campaign rhetoric, or community forums where mythic narratives of national identity are explored against lived realities. This turns confusion into actionable vectors for informed voting and post-election accountability, regardless of who takes office, empowering citizens to practice sharp discernment and build their own inner compass for civic engagement.
That audit builds inner and civic resilience, Kaylin, encouraging sharp discernment to separate true architectural signal from political noise. It's about empowering structural self-worth in the face of shifting power, using myth, humor, and clear analysis to turn confusion into actionable vectors.
Play the next move.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.